Hello, everyone. I'm Sanjoy Dutta, Chief Scientific Officer at JDRF. I'm really excited to present to you JDRF's research strategy, particularly as it focuses on this fiscal year, FY24, and what's imminent in the next few months or even the next year or so. So let me dive right in here. There's a lot of content that I want to get through here. You are all very aware of our vision. Our single laser focus is in a world without type 1 diabetes. But today, our mission remains unwaveringly focused on improving the lives of everyone with type 1 diabetes today and tomorrow by accelerating life-changing breakthroughs that can cure, prevent, and treat type 1 diabetes and its complications. So that hasn't changed, and we are really proud of the progress that we've made along both our mission and vision here. And in the research department, we constantly have to prioritize, like you do while you run a very exciting program with lots of options here. So we prioritize the research funding that has the highest likelihood of accelerating our mission while maintaining strategic gap-filling funding in areas that improves the lives of people with diabetes in the United States and all around the world here. Our work is more important than ever, as is titled in this slide here. And the reality today is the incidence and the prevalence of type 1 diabetes is increasing, unfortunately, all over the world. And it's increasing in different ethnic populations, certainly in all geographies. It's also increasing in all age groups. So the problem is bigger than what we knew or what we thought of 20 years ago. And so our work, our leadership, and the role we play as JDRF is all the more important now. And underpinning all of that is our research strategy and all other mission-related strategy at JDRF here. Let me walk you through some of the ways we're trying to achieve this and achieve our mission and solve the problems that are at hand right now. One critical thing that JDRF does, and it's very, very important, is to work across the pipeline and in getting these therapies to the T1D community. And by the pipeline, this is a research and development pipeline, which includes all the way at the very start of an idea, an ideation, a bullet light bulb goes on in someone's head, all the way into people with diabetes using the therapies and doing better. These chevrons illustrate major inflection points along that, around the processes of going from bench side to clinical trials, to product development, to regulatory approval, so on and so forth. And then very importantly, getting that covered, getting clinicians to understand the value proposition of a therapy, to understand which kinds of people with type 1 diabetes, what stages that can benefit from it, and then ensuring there's adoption of the therapy so people actually do better. And we play a role all along this pipeline here in ensuring that people with T1D are going to do better than they are doing or they were doing before. In the priorities that we set, and as I showed you a couple slides ago about the priorities here, is what are we doing to cure and prevent as well as improve people's lives? On the top panel shown are major areas of focus within the cures area. How can we get these people to a biological cure, often called a disease-modifying therapy? And I'll get into each of these in the next few slides. How can we provide them insulin independence and better glucose control and avert complications through like cell replacement therapies? How do we find who is at risk through screening of individuals? And then improving lives is a broad area that affects the 1.4 million Americans, 8 or 9 million people around the world today living with the disease, and unfortunately the number is increasing here. And while we focus on these therapy developments at JDRF, we are very aware about the anemic state of the researchers and the clinicians that are actually going to do the research and provide the clinical care. Endocrinology or diabetes research in general is an underfunded area in the United States and around the world here. So a critical thing JDRF does is to train also the people pipeline along the way, along with the therapeutic pipeline here. So training is a very important program, and we are proud to say that our program is one of the largest around the world that trains the researchers and the clinicians here. I will not have time to get into the details of the training, but all along these therapy areas, we are training individuals in the research as well as in clinical care here. Let me dive into each of the areas now. What is a disease-modifying therapy? And this is essentially the mission, or part of the mission of JDRF in curing curing type 1 diabetes here. And this particular table, and you've seen different versions of the staging of type 1 diabetes. You've seen it in the form of a curve we often show, called the Eisenbergian curve, that shows progressive loss of insulin production. This is the same thing represented now as a table. What's shown in the top three columns, rows there, are basically ways of staging the people with type 1 diabetes, starting with stage 0, that's not named here, where people actually essentially have full insulin production, full glucose control. They don't have any signs of autoimmunity in them, yet they may or may not be at a genetic risk. And then starts the onset of type 1 diabetes through the stages 1 and 2, where there are increasing signs of autoantibodies in your blood, or your autoimmunity is active and beginning to destroy the insulin-producing beta cells. And then you slowly lose the insulin-producing capacity and lose the internal glycemic control or glucose control that your pancreas provides. And then you enter into a stage called stage 3, when you frankly need external insulin treatment to be able to control your blood sugar levels. Currently, or today, that's when the clinical diagnosis of type 1 diabetes happens. But we know very well type 1 diabetes actually starts years or decades before stage 3 or insulin dependence happens. And how can we stop that progression? And I'll get into that as well. And then stage 4, which is sometimes called established type 1 diabetes, are the people essentially completely insulin dependent and living with, and in some cases also living with some complications here. And what can we do there? So the various curative programs in the colored bars below, and I'll get into each of them in a second here, are showing you research that we are supporting or advocating for to accelerate therapeutic developments that can provide these to the people with type 1 diabetes at these various stages. So I'll get into some of these and give you some examples as well here. And then throughout the course of the year, we'll provide you more updates, deep dives into each of the areas that me and my colleagues will be doing over the next several months or so. So in disease-modifying therapy, what we are trying to essentially do in a simplified and a higher level view is to address the core underlying problem in type 1 diabetes, which is two things. One is an active immune system that is destroying your own pancreatic beta cells that make insulin here. So how can you thwart that immune process? How can you slow down or rebalance that immune system so it no longer remains active to destroy the beta cells, but don't affect the overall immunity in the body? And that's a tight balance that we are trying to achieve. And along with that, how do you regrow the lost beta cells, the beta cells that have already been destroyed, and the insulin producing capacity that has already been compromised here? And how do you regrow these beta cells, sometimes known as regeneration here? And in order to cure the disease, we will have to address both the problems in type 1 diabetes. And we have made a lot of progress here, and what's shown on this slide is obviously a seminal approval by the FDA in the United States last year in November of a therapy called Tzield, sometimes also known as teplizumab. It's decades of research that JDRF and many others, including the NIH through the SDP program, funded in bringing this immunotherapy approach in the slide I showed you before, in people at stage 2 type 1 diabetes. So as a reminder, these are people starting with age 8 all the way into adulthood that have autoantibodies, an active immune system, have a compromised insulin producing ability, but are not insulin requiring yet. And this particular therapy, when given to these individuals, delays the onset of insulin dependence by about 3 years or so, and the studies are still underway to see if the effect can go longer. It's very exciting times. It has taken a long time to get to this milestone, but I believe firmly, and I'll get to that at the end of the presentation here, we have many, many other similar promising therapies in clinical trials right now here. So Tzield, while is a very important achievement, this is one of many that are to come here, and I'll get to that in a second. And because of this significant effort we are putting in this space, both in addressing the immune system as well as in trying to regrow the beta cells or protect the remaining beta cells, we have some very promising therapies coming up in the next few months to few years that will add to the armamentarium of the TZIL, which is the first win we have had so far. Now, in order for disease-modifying therapies to be successful, to know who can avail a therapy, who can participate in a clinical trial, who can be nearest to the benefit, as well as figure out, with all these therapies in development that I just mentioned, we know that any therapy is not going to work for everyone, as well as some therapies can, some people can benefit from 2 or more therapies. So for that, we need to know who is at risk. And so screening, as well as monitoring these individuals, becomes a very important priority at JDRF. So why screen? And I mentioned in the very first slide here, showing you the incidence and prevalence across the world. Here, T1D is on the rise in all geographies, all ethnicities. It's a global problem. And we are a global organization, the global leader, trying to address this here. By screening, we get some really important acute benefits of screening and monitoring. And then we also get some very significant long-term outcomes. The acute benefit is we avoid, essentially eliminate, almost eliminate a very dangerous condition in which most people are diagnosed if they're not screened and monitored, called diabetic ketoacidosis. This is an immediate impact that we get, as well as the development of that individual, particularly in pediatric population, that can avoid DKA at diagnosis is much, much better than people that end up in DKA. There are several long-term outcomes, starting with mental health, cognitive and behavioral health, as well as hemoglobin A1C, the key marker of long-term complications. All of these have shown beneficial effects if we are able to screen and monitor and avoid DKA, and some of the sequelae of a T1D diagnosis here. This is very important while we are addressing the screening, and I'll show you in the next slide our various efforts, ongoing efforts here. Another essential component is to identify these people, put them into clinical trials, provided they're willing and able to participate, and accelerate the development of disease-modifying therapies. So it actually has a very, very good positive ripple effect here of screening and monitoring here. And that's what we are trying to get to this macro effect of what we are doing here. Shown on this slide are 3 major areas of focus, and then there are many, many things within each of these 3 areas of focus. First is the basic research that we need to know. Who is at risk? How do we monitor them at risk? What are the screening tools? What are the monitoring tools? And how can we build this evidentiary basis through research and through several efforts that can then be rolled out into the community? That can be broad scale. We don't need to be in a research setting, in a hospital setting like within the United States or anywhere in the world. We can actually roll it out into the masses so that a general pediatrician or a general adult practitioner can be screening the people that come into their clinic. We can roll it out to the endocrinology practices as well, and all others. And for that, we have a T1 Detect program, which presently is in the United States, but we have other programs around the world that are addressing community screening and monitoring here. As well as a critical component is education, healthcare provider education, families with T1D as well as without T1D education, education of policymakers, so on and so forth. And that obviously leads into a huge policy effort, mostly in the health policy area. We want to ensure that while this research is building the body of evidence, while we are rolling out community screening, we're actually aiming for the North Star, which is full coverage in the preventive service area of screening of every individual in the general population, so that they're screened for risk, just as you screen your cholesterol for heart disease risk, just as you screen for blood pressure, and you screen for other antigens like prostate antigen, breast cancer markers. We can make this routine care towards preventive services, and that is our North Star goal. And between the research and the advocacy departments, we are striving hard to achieve this goal, along with several partners in the United States and around the world here. And that's exactly what's shown here. These are the various screening and monitoring programs that we have around the world that JDRF is involved in. And there are several others that JDRF is not directly involved in here. Now, I will not be walking you through each of these, but suffice to say that this being a global problem, as I started this presentation, we have a robust effort in various parts of the world, and our goal is to get this data, and I have just one more slide on this topic, to get all of these into this evidentiary basis so that we can build the evidence that now health policymakers around the world are able to cover screening and monitoring. We identify these individuals early on. They can participate in clinical trials and benefit from the therapies. And when therapies like TZIELD get approved and are available in the market, they can actually prevent the onset or delay the onset of diabetes, as well as for the newly diagnosed individuals, maybe extend the period in which their beta cells are still healthy and functioning here. And that's exactly what's shown here. This is another way of showing the stages. I showed you a table before. Now I show you a linear progression of the disease. And as you go from left to right, you're progressively losing your insulin-producing capacity. As I mentioned before, you're becoming more and more insulin dependent. Your immunity, autoimmunity in the body is very active. Now, how are we able to identify this? There's obviously a genetic risk component to it. And what are these genetic risk markers? There's a robust effort we're putting in here that we need to understand the genetic risks of all populations, all ethnicities, all genetic makeups here. And are there immunological markers here, in addition to the autoantibodies that we currently measure in the blood, that are established markers of an active immune system here? There could be other upstream markers that we need to identify early on, even before these autoantibodies come into the blood. And remember, at the end of the day, this is an autoimmune disease, but it has a metabolic manifestation. How are we measuring the disease? By glucose levels, hemoglobin A1C levels, so on and so forth. And now there are markers that are showing damage to the insulin-producing beta cells. So we have a whole effort at JDRF and working with several partners, academic, industry, and other not-for-profits and federal funders, in trying to collectively understand what are the best diagnostics and prognostic tools here that we can hone in on to enhance our current practice, which relies entirely on autoantibody levels and what we call an oral glucose tolerance test. So there are many sophisticated tools like CGM metrics and other things that we should be leveraging in a more broader scale and then roll it out so that they are covered by payers to be used. So this is a very big effort that we have undertaken here, and this is absolutely critical for us to be able to prevent and cure the disease in as many individuals as we possibly can. All that said and done, there are, as I said, millions of people around the world already living with the disease. And what can we do for them? So we have done significant work that I'll allude to toward the end of the presentation in offering them better ways of controlling their glucose levels, even delaying complications. But there are ways we can provide them insulin independence, and that's through cell therapy approaches. So what are these cell therapy approaches? Now, myself and many of our colleagues have presented to you before why we have so much hope and faith and the promise ahead in cell replacement therapies. All of these stem from seminal work in a whole organ pancreas replacement, as well as islet replacement therapies. Islet cells or pancreatic islet cells, insulin-producing cells, derived from diseased individuals or cadavers. So cadaveric islet transplantation, which is practiced in many, many parts of the world, and most recently there was an approval by the FDA that I'll get into here, has demonstrated to us unequivocally that if you replace the lost cells through external sources, we are able to provide insulin independence, almost normal glucose control levels, and potentially thwart long-term effects of complications here. We can reverse the disease in some ways through this practical cure or a functional cure, as it's sometimes called here. And we are feverishly pursuing this here through research and development at the discovery level, testing them, translating them into therapies and clinical trials, working with the industry to develop these therapies here, and then working with regulators FDA, EMA, and other regulators to have a pathway. So these are reviewed in an accelerated fashion by the regulators and are approved. There's a pathway for that. And then, of course, once approved, ensure there's coverage for it. Ensure that there's enough clinician education so that they can deploy these therapies to the individuals that need them, as well as make sure that the people understand the benefit to risk profile and avail the therapies here. So this is going to be a marathon here, but I'm very pleased to say, and I'll show you a little bit of the progress we have made here. Why are we not pursuing cadaveric islet transplantation? Because it has been shown to work. There are two essential problems, and this is what we are trying to address here. One is a supply-demand issue. We will never have enough cadaveric islets for the millions affected by the disease already. So we need to produce these cells through non-cadaveric sources here. That's where stem cell biology comes in. And what's shown on the left is 15 years of JDRF funding and other funders also stepping in here, including a lot of pharmaceutical effort here in creating, developing these insulin-producing beta cells from non-beta cell sources outside the body, in a petri dish, in a flask, in a test tube, however, and then scaling them up, making them in billions quantities so we can make sure that they are available for the masses affected by the disease. We know a problem with transplantation of any organ, any type of cells, not just pancreatic beta cells or islet cells, is these cells are again vulnerable to the body's immune system. They are going to be recognized as foreign cells and destroyed. Remember, you're putting them in people with autoimmune diabetes. So the autoimmune component will again destroy the beta cells like they destroyed the native beta cells in the person. So we have a robust effort in trying to protect these beta cells, protect the transplanted, what we call sometimes grafts, and protect the individual cells so they survive longer. They continue to make insulin and they continue to elicit the benefits that we are hoping to achieve here. I'm really pleased to say that the first problem that I showed you on the left side is making cells, growing them in large amounts, making sure they function, is mostly resolved. Through years of JDRF funding, both basic research, clinical research, working with the pharmaceutical companies, both at the foundation and our T1D fund, all of which are shown in the top panel there, we have made tremendous progress. And these cells are actually in people. They're actually showing benefits. And I have one slide on that coming up soon. However, we also know that the buck doesn't stop there. We need to constantly foster innovation. So we need to make sure that several other academics and smaller companies and even large companies that are coming up with protection strategies are able to have these cells. Because we don't want everyone reinventing the wheels, everyone trying to make their own stem cells, everyone trying to grow them up in large amounts. And that's why we have a very important partnership with the Advanced Regenerative Medicine Institute in New Hampshire, which is a regenerative medicine not-for-profit organization significantly funded by the Department of Defense in multiple areas of regenerative medicine. And we are partnering with them to scale up the manufacturing as well as the clinical, initially research grade, but eventually clinical grade of these insulin-producing beta cells so that we can get more and more innovation, more and more therapies that can be developed at a very fast pace, in addition to what the very important work that the Vertexes and the Biosites and the Novo Nordisk and all of the other companies, which we are very appreciative of, are pursuing for our disease. Now comes the major, the elephant in the room. How do you protect these cells here? While we have made significant progress, and there are many, many methodologies and technologies that we are working on, we and others are working on, such as shown here, can we protect the cells through encapsulation? Can we have somewhat of an approach where we create scaffolds that are not fully encapsulated? Can we provide, instead of bombarding the entire body with immunosuppression, which is deleterious, can we provide local immunosuppression at the site of implantation so that the other organs are not exposed to the immunosuppressive agents? Or can we really go for the holy grail, which is gene editing technology, which, as you all know, won the Nobel Prize a few years ago and is being pursued by multiple diseases that have organ failure? can we make these super beta cells by gene modification so that they continue to make insulin, but they're now invisible to the body's immune system. So you can inject them in the body, but you don't need to provide any immunosuppression because these cells will behave like an endogenous beta cell and will not be recognized by the body's immune system. While this is very promising, we have multiple irons in the fire, and they all have various advantages. Suffice to say, there is no silver bullet yet. So we need to be pursuing this here. Pharma companies are also figuring out the best way of protecting the cells. And collectively, I am positive all these efforts will be able to come up with technologies that can protect the cells. And it may be a combination of one or more of these approaches at the end of the day to make different products for people with type 1 diabetes here. All of these happen at a very important thing that JDRF started more than a decade ago, the JDRF Beta Cell Replacement Consortium. What this is shown here in the various circles is essentially a multidisciplinary team that we bring together. It has many, many academic expertise, cell biology, genetics, immunologists, biomedical engineers, so on and so forth. We bring in regulatory expertise. We bring in policy expertise. There are academics, pharmaceutical companies, not-for-profit organizations. Many of these think tanks come together at least twice a year to meet in person, but also meet regularly throughout the course of the years to discuss the advances, to discuss areas of collaboration, avoid redundancies, be economical so everybody doesn't have to do everything. And it's not possible to be doing this. Many things have been born out of this consortium, many things. I've listed just a few in the top right panel. For example, gene editing approaches, 3D bioprinting approaches to create these scaffolds and these structures that can mimic the pancreas. How can we have novel immune engineering and immune imaging approaches, so on and so forth. We've also started a seminar series with the regulators here to apprise them of the developments so that when a product comes to them for review, they have all this information, because this is uncharted waters that we are trying to navigate along with the community here. Many, many industries have benefited from this, particularly the ones that have come out of IP that has been developed within the consortium here. And some of those are named at the bottom right. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the ones that have been born out of the consortium here. And we are very, very pleased that we are able to offer this to the community, to the research community, as well as the pharmaceutical companies here as an avenue to accelerate the field here and make those breakthroughs. Speaking of breakthroughs, one thing that happened here was an approval by the FDA of cadaveric islet transplantation in the month of June. So not too long ago. Now, this is a process, this is a particular thing that happens at many research centers in the United States and around the world. It's also happening in some of the clinics in many parts of the world here. What FDA approved recently was one such cadaveric islet transplant product here. But we look at the bigger picture. While this is an important milestone and of clinical islet transplantation funded by the National Institute of Health, we look at this as the stepping stone towards many other therapies with stem cell replacement therapies that I just spoke to you about. This paves the way. It creates a regulatory path forward. It shows to the community as to what kind of trials need to be done here. And this has been a long-time effort that JDRF's Research and Advocacy Department have collaborated with external experts in the field and funders like the NIH to get to this point here. But as I mentioned, and it's worth repeating, that this is a stepping stone towards many more successes to come here. And I'm looking forward to that. We are also heartened by the significant investment by the pharmaceutical and biotech sector. And here are shown just 3 examples here, but there are many more to it. To the left is something that you've heard a lot about, the company Vertex, and now they've even acquired ViaCyte, the company that JDRF funded for many, many years here. And they have shown tremendous progress here, including their stem cell-based therapy that is providing benefits in their VX-880 product, which requires immunosuppression. And it's meant for a subset of the people with type 1 diabetes that have an extreme condition called hypoglycemia unawareness. But the results look very, very promising so far, and showing insulin independence in a few of the individuals that have had the therapy for more than a year, showing the safety of the particular therapy here. And Vertex hasn't stopped there. They have another trial that just started in which they're using their proprietary encapsulation technology without the need of immunosuppression and putting the same stem cells that are used in VX-880. And this product is called VX-264 that just started the clinical trials. And they have many others in the planning, as do other companies. Recently, Vertex broke ground in starting another manufacturing facility in partnership with a company called Lanza here in the northeast part of the United States here. And then again, we were heartened by announcements from Novo Nordisk about a huge cell therapy manufacturing facility, Novo Nordisk Foundation, that is, and a recent partnership that Novo Nordisk established with the biotech company based out of Canada that has 3D bioprinting technology that JDRF supported earlier on, called Aspect Biosciences here. And so all of these and many others not shown on this slide are collectively, steering in the same direction to accelerate these breakthrough therapies that can provide insulin independence to people with type 1 diabetes. And then I'll quickly touch upon our strategy in the area of improving lives, that I think this particular area of research is very familiar to you all, because you are actually using many of these today and benefiting from it. We can talk about the unmet needs. People with type 1 diabetes are certainly doing much, much better than they were doing 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago. If you look at their glucose control levels, if you look at the hemoglobin A1C levels, if you look at the rate of reduction of complications that is happening, that's all very encouraging. The awareness is up, and the effort to do better is also up compared to what it was 10 years ago. But the reality is there is still unmet clinical need. Despite these advances, the average A1C in the country is nowhere where the American Diabetes Association's recommended numbers are. 2 out of 5 people are achieving those in the adults, and even less in the pediatric population. There's a huge mental health burden. So we need to be doing more. And our strategy is trying to fill those gaps, close those knowledge gaps, fill those product development gaps that JDRF should be doing now, so that it complements the efforts going on by the rest of the T1D community here. Broadly, we continue to emphasize on device-based approaches that have done really well for people with diabetes in terms of glucose control, insulin delivery, automation, simplification, miniaturization, so on and so forth, advanced algorithms. So we continue to support that area. We are also, we have been steering another area for the last decade plus in adjunctive therapies that can complement the action of insulin and provide. We initially started by providing better glucose control, better metabolic control. But now we are seeing many of these adjunctive therapies, not all of them, but many of them actually provide even long-term benefits in delaying complications, in providing benefits for heart and kidney. And they're actually approved for many, many people with type 2 diabetes and kidney disease, or no diabetes and kidney disease, as well as in the case of heart disease. But they're not approved for people with type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes has been largely left out by most of the pharmaceutical development, and we are trying to change that. And what is the role we can play as leaders here? And we're not forgetting the fact that this is a 24/7, 365 disease that affects the individual, the immediate caregivers around the individual, and the society at large. And this mental health burden and the poor outcomes that accompany this, both the mental health and cognitive outcomes as well as the clinical outcomes, is something that absolutely needs to be addressed and fixed here. This is something I alluded to earlier here, that these advances in closed loop systems, artificial pancreas systems, better devices are very encouraging. However, the large majority of the population are not achieving the target levels. We also know that just as the entire world is has become overweight or obese, unfortunately, people with type 1 diabetes haven't been spared from those metabolic pathologies, so to speak. And we know that in the United States, the data out of the T1D Exchange Registry showed that 2/3 of the adults are overweight or obese, and close to half of the people below the age of 18, the pediatric and adolescent population, are also overweight or obese. And that has consequences. And beyond just the type 1 diabetes. And then again, while the complications have certainly reduced with better glucose control, we know we are not out of the woods yet. Still, people with diabetes are developing kidney disease, particularly long-standing. Still, heart disease remains the primary cause of death in adults with type 1 diabetes. And that is also the reason for the life expectancy gap between people with type 1 diabetes and without diabetes. Our role is to change that. Have these therapies for people with type 1 diabetes. Close that life expectancy gap here. And we will not stop until we get there, so that we can have as close to normal glucose control as possible, as close to general population level complications as is possible here. So that type 1 diabetes, people with type 1 diabetes are not at a greater disadvantage because of the condition they have here. There have been several breakthroughs. You're all very aware of the breakthroughs in the area of devices here. And many people are not only benefiting from it, but are also able to have a choice of what device can work best for them. Is it perfect? No. And so our advocacy team is working very hard to ensure that there's coverage, there's adoption, there's true choice, there's true place where we can have interoperability between these. At the same time, as I alluded to earlier, there are adjunctive therapies that are working wonders for people without type 1 diabetes. But we know through many, many studies we have funded that people with type 1 diabetes are benefiting from these adjunctive therapies. Shown here are two classes. One is a class called incretins, or GLP-1 receptor agonists. On the left, Ozempic, a drug that's been in the news a lot. And the other one is an oral therapy that helps with kidney and heart complications, and certainly with glucose control, called SGLT inhibitors, that helps you eliminate glucose through the urine. And these classes have significant promise, and we have a major effort to ensure that these therapies are available for people with type 1 diabetes. Available meaning they're approved by the regulators, they're covered by the payers, and people are actually benefiting from these here. As I mentioned to you, and as I come towards the close of our research strategy presentation here, mental health burden is certainly a 24/7, 365 burden. It is also a burden across the disease continuum. Doesn't matter what age you're in. Yes, the challenges and the psychosocial problems may differ depending on your age and stage of the disease, but it is always there. And we have multiple efforts ongoing here. How can we measure these? Just as in screening, you're measuring the risk through autoantibodies, through glucose levels. Here, there are measures in assessing the psychological stress or the mental health stress. How can we have a unified approach there? How can we support the development of interventions through clinical trials that can ideally eliminate the mental health burden? We have multiple trials going on in that place here. Then the paucity of people to provide the care is really large. So endocrinology has a big gap. Psychologists probably may even have a bigger gap here. So we have a robust program in training professionals that are specialized in providing the psychological care for people with diabetes here. So that requires an additional level of specialization here. And then how can we have a healthcare model that we can implement these? So it's not enough to develop these and get the data here. We have to have them covered. We have to have a healthcare system that makes it easy for the healthcare provider and the person with diabetes, and doesn't provide an operational burden to be able to avail this. So all of this is a very, very big area that we are trying to address now. And we're very appreciative of other funders like the Helm Street Charitable Trust and many others that also have a robust effort in this space here. Now, all of these research strategy, priorities, promises ahead, some challenges ahead are quite a big thing that we are trying to tackle. But there are many other things that are important that we are trying to build around infrastructure that can become accelerators. One of the key advantages, but also a key hurdle, is clinical trial speed. Clinical trials are the only way we can develop these therapies, get them approved, get them covered. Yet, clinical trials have become the Achilles heel of progress. They take a very long time, recruitment of people, retention of people, the trials are long. We have multiple efforts ongoing in breaking those barriers, in trying to eliminate those hurdles along the way. So we have this clinical trial participation tool. This is a matchmaking tool that has been very, very successful, but it's not the only tool in our toolbox here. We have a robust program in educating people here, empowering volunteers, empowering professionals here to know about these therapies that are in development, to know their risk level, to know that they can actually benefit by participating in a clinical trial. Clinical trials are actually safe and effective. We also have a patient advisory council, a body of professionals with clinical backgrounds, clinicians, nurse practitioners, et cetera, that are there to answer your questions here. So collectively, clinical trial connections, clinical trial education volunteers, education of healthcare providers, and many, many other tools that we are deploying here are able to address some of these problems. But we certainly need you at the other end to also become our champions so that we can collectively solve this problem fast. As I promised earlier, that I will close by showing what's ahead. What's the promise ahead here? And what's shown here is basically we are expecting to see a lot of results. And in the blue, above the line and the horizontal line are therapies that are in the improving lives area that are tested in clinical trials now, and in black in the line below the horizontal below the horizontal line are cure therapies here. So let's go from right to left now. And if you go from right to left, these are the most advanced. So we're expecting clinical trial results from a bunch of therapies in the cure space, disease-modifying therapies, as well as cell therapies in the bottom, and in adjunctive therapies areas, in improving lives in the top there. So they are imminent. They should be coming in the next few months and before the close of this fiscal year. Then if you walk your way to the middle are the ones that just started their clinical trials. So they're in earlier stages. So it'll be a little while, maybe more than a year, maybe 2 to 3 years when we get them. But it's very promising, a lot to look forward to. To the left are more earlier stages. So they have just been funded. They're yet to start the clinical trial. So this is basically a time horizon where near term is to the right and a little bit of a longer term is to your left. So a lot to look forward to. And in the next few months, and certainly in the next couple of years, me and others are going to come to you as we become aware of these results and show you what worked, what didn't work, what are the next steps, who can benefit, and what can be your role in championing this as well. And then, sorry, my slide is not moving here, right here. And so, that's where, this is a continuation of that here. There's a lot to look forward to, and I highlighted some of this in the previous slide there, but that's not an exhaustive list. There is actually more coming here. And please be on the lookout. We will provide updates to you frequently in different forums here, me and my colleagues. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We'll be happy to take them on. And thank you for your attention, for your support, and for your encouragement that is making us the leader we are in type 1 diabetes globally today. Look forward to speaking again soon.